worship webinar. It's hosted by the Yorkshire Plus Learning Network, and my name's Carla. I serve as part of that team. It's of course good to welcome one and all, especially want to welcome the Revd Sean Adair, who will be leading us through this afternoon. For those of you that don't know Sean, Sean is a Methodist minister, superintendent of the newly formed Derbyshire North East Circuit and deputy chair of the Sheffield district. He's also a practitioner of hybrid worship and hybrid church. Gladly welcome you, Sean, to this, and we're really glad that you brought some guests and some friends along to help you through this afternoon as well. I'm sure you'll introduce them as they participate. So as we begin, and as I hand over to Sean in a moment, let's just pause, settle our hearts, and as we do that, let us pray. Let's pray together. Loving God, we thank you for this time and opportunity to reflect on the ministry you've called us to reflect on the ministry of hybrid worship and church. Give to us discerning hearts and minds to discover what and how we can apply our learning from today into our local context. Bless those who are leading today. Give to them clarity of thought and speech. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So Sean, it's a pleasure to hand over to you. We're looking forward to what you have to bring to us today.
Well, thank you, Carla, and welcome everybody. It's good to have so many here today, and I feel slightly intimidated because I see a number of colleagues from both the present and the past, and indeed a number of students and candidates, etc., that I used to work with in a previous life. So it is great to see you all again and to share in this session. As Carla has said, for those who don't know me, I'm presently a superintendent minister in the newly formed Derbyshire North East Circuit, which began its life on the 1st September. We were the bringing together of the former Chesterfield Circuit and the Bolsover and Staveley circuits here in this part of the country at the southern end of our region here in Yorkshire Plus. I'm somebody who has served previously in South Yorkshire in the Rotherham Circuit, and indeed for 5 years working in the York Institute for Community Theology, which entailed being involved in training and ministers and lay folk in all kinds of different ways, and been able to work alongside some wonderful colleagues during that time. And 22 years ago now, I said to my wife, okay, we can go from the Irish Methodist Church to England, but for no more than about 3-4 years. And then we'll go back to Ireland. But here we are still 22 years later here in England, and continuing to be missionaries to this pagan offshore island. So we've enjoyed our time here in the British Methodist Church and continue to feel very much part of it. I consider myself to be a learner. I'm not an expert. I found myself rather bemused that I was being asked to lead this session today, and for that reason I have invited in a number of people who I've found to be helpful myself. During the 6-7 months of the lockdown, I found myself relating to people like Bryony and Wayne and to James, who we'll find later on, we'll introduce you to later on, finding the hints, the tips, the information, the learning that they had discovered helpful in the developing ministry that I was engaging in myself. But as we were starting to come to the end of the lockdown, the first lockdown period, It's interesting that we're meeting today at the beginning of a further time of social restrictions. But at the time when we were starting to emerge, there was a question which was around how do we continue to have that online presence and yet also at the same time re-engage in some aspects of the church that we'd previously known it. I put it this way in our own circuit, that really we've got three outputs of ministry. One is physical gatherings, and we've been trying to do that in a limited way for the last 2 months, although that's come to an end obviously now today. And also, so not only physical gatherings, but a continuing online gathering, and that had various ways in which it developed over those 6-7 months. It started a simple thing. I'm a Mac user, so it started with saying, you know, that program that's called iMovie, I really should learn how to use it. And then learning how to record songs and record services, and then moving to Zoom services, and then moving to Facebook Live, and all these sort of things I've learned as I've gone along through the help of people like those I'm sharing with today. I want to go back a little bit before that. I've had a conviction for some time that there is something to do with the possibilities of online ministry for our mission and our life as a church that is, as it were, underdeveloped. That was rammed home to me in a number of ways. One was I was aware of a number of people who are housebound or have life-limiting conditions, who are unable to engage with church within the usual four walls in the way that many of us enjoy. And indeed, some of them are the ones who have most loudly said over the last 7 months that they're quite grateful for this time, because even though they have to self-isolate, etc., because of their vulnerabilities, at least for the first time, they are being engaged with the church and with their fellowship in the online space in a way that they hadn't been previously. We sort of felt we should be going in this direction, but if you like, the pandemic has kicked us into doing it, whether we liked it or not. We've had to learn a lot of new skills along the way. And it wasn't just those who are, as it were, housebound or have life-limiting conditions or different aspects of their person that meant that they just couldn't engage with church as we knew it. Nevertheless, they're the ones who have said they've most valued it. Also alongside that, there are people who I'd call those that we connect with through our things like community cafes, people who come into our church buildings for various reasons, but don't normally find it easy to come into a Sunday morning space. We found that they are the ones who have engaged also with the online ministry because it's safe for them to do so. And they're the ones who send me the chat messages that say, you know, this is really helping me. This is helping me survive through the lockdown, and their own sense of personal development happening. It's also a sense in which someone who looks after 5 congregations, myself and a couple of them really quite big congregations, you always have this dilemma as a Methodist minister, that you're being called to be in a number of places at the same time, that you somehow wish the Lord had given you the gift of omnipresence. But despite that, you have to sort of go where you can. And also someone who works at district level, there's that district dimension and sometimes the regional dimension and beyond as well. So it can be a challenge to be in a number of different places. And so what I found difficult and yet also encouraging early on in the pandemic was for people to say to me, Sean, you know what, it's really great because we're getting more of your ministry now than we ever had. You know, we're getting daily devotions, we're getting online Bible studies, we're getting to hear you preach and lead our worship every Sunday. We've sort of never had it so good, was how one person put it. Now, in one sense, I felt slightly ashamed of that because, you know, I felt bad that I hadn't been ministering to them as effectively before. But now I've been given the opportunity to do so, and so I don't want to lose that. And I guess many of you feel the same. I'm also aware that another experience I had about 2 years ago now has informed my thinking, and that was visiting a church in Washington, D.C. on a sabbatical trip. a church that is a multi-site church, effectively what we'd call a circuit. And the one minister preaches in 8 different churches every Sunday. How does he do it? He records a sermon on a Saturday evening in one of the venues, and then that sermon is projected in the other sites on the Sunday. In one sense, that might feel distasteful to you, and indeed, talking to people like Pete Phillips, there's a whole thing about the sacramental moment of preaching, which is a whole different area of theology we're not going to get into this afternoon. The preaching moment, the preaching occasion. But at the same time, it was dealing with issues that we all deal with in our circuits, which are to do with things like capacity. You know, have we got enough preachers to fill the plan? And capacity in the sense of being able to do the sort of quality of worship and preaching that we'd expect, we'd want to have on all our sites. And also a sense in which it helps us deal with a consistency so that we are able each week, as it were, to keep our community coherent and being able to converse with them. That was a model that was shared with me 2 years ago. It's been bubbling around with me. I've talked to people like Rachel McCallan about this and others around the region, trying to think through how can we use technology well. So we've had to use it for the last 6-7 months and continue to do so. But one of the questions that one of my colleagues asked when we started to emerge again into physical gatherings was, how do we resource it all? How can I continue to resource the church as we've known it? Another question alongside that, should we be resourcing the church as we've always known it? And then alongside that, you know, how do we best equip our local preachers and worship leaders to be ministers of the word and of worship, not only in the physical space, but in the online space? What does worship look like? I've been asking more recently in the last 2 months, what does worship look like now when you have to sit 2 meters apart, wearing a mask, you can't sing, and it's all very sanitized? And of course, we've all made best efforts of that. Although there's a part of me keeps asking myself the question, asking others the question, is this an opportunity for us to go right back to the very heart of worship and the ministry of the word, to unpack theologically what we believe these things are about, and look at new ways of doing this, and not just trying to somehow get back to how things were before? So I feel like there's a whole host of questions that this period in our church's history, and we've used words like unprecedented, we've used words like you know, unique and distinct times, but certainly for all of us here, it is new, and it's not easy. It's really uncomfortable, and we're all learning as we go along. I'm certainly learning, and at the same time, I've become more and more convinced that our calling that the Methodist Church set up in 2000 at the Methodist Conference at Huddersfield, the Our Calling mission statement, that we are called to respond to the gospel of God's love in Christ and live that out in worship and mission and discipleship. That hasn't changed. We're still called to worship. We're still called to learn. We're still called to care and to serve and to share in the good news of evangelism. Though that calling hasn't changed. So how do we do it now? And how do we do it well? And we've been exploring that. And this word hybrid is an interesting one. I was thinking about it as I was preparing. It's not a new word to be used against church, alongside church. I found a book in my study just an hour ago, The Hybrid Church in the City, which is a couple of years old now, by somebody called Christopher Baker. And it's a conversation about how do you do the church, not just in one way, but in multiple ways, and different expressions of ministry and mission in the one place. So hybrid or blended worship and mission and church are not new concepts, but they've been brought to the front and to the fore in the present. So our calling hasn't changed, but it does have to be expressed differently or in new ways. And I guess the conversation I have a lot with my circuit staff is that there's a constant tension for the church that, if you want to use the metaphor of the wilderness, that somehow we're on that journey between Egypt and the promised land. Well, we're in the midst of that journey, where every corner we're going somewhere where we haven't been before. There is, of course, a desire constantly to go back to where we've been, alongside a desire to keep moving forward with where we believe God is leading us into that which we don't know yet. This week in our prayer readings, in our Methodist lectionary, we've been looking at the stories of Abraham. And again, that sense of going where we don't know where we're going, but going out of a sense of calling and direction. So I feel like there's a calling within us that says, let's get back to how we know it. But there's also a calling that says, actually, could it be that in this moment we're being called to somewhere new? The other thought I wanted to share just very briefly was this thing about hybrid. In the last generation, sort of 15, 20 years ago, Rowland Williams, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, talked about fresh expressions and about mixed economy. In a sense, that was the conversation then about how do you resource church as we've known it, the traditional church, the established church, but also do the new stuff, and how do we hold the two together? And how do we resource them both well? And he was very much talking about a both and model. I guess that's the conversation we're having today, but in a slightly different format. Pete Phillips, with others, Bryony being one of them, who's with us today, have just recently, literally about last week, or the week before, published a book in the Grove series called Hybrid Church, literally, straight off the presses. And you can download your own copy for £3.50 today. The book, and Pete Phillips is one of our own Methodist theologians based out of Durham, and someone who thinks about digital evangelism, digital church, and digital ministry as a sort of constant life for him, is encouraging us to think, particularly alongside passages like Hebrews chapter 1 that talked about God working in many different places and in many different ways. And again, we're being invited, as it were, to push the boundaries of that which we've known, to see and to think about church, and to think about ministry in new ways. So it raises all kinds of questions for us, this new hybrid world that we find ourselves thrown into. We've been talking about these things for the last couple of months, and they raise all sorts of questions about ecclesiology, i.e., what is the church? What is our definition of church, and does our definition of church fit for the world that we're now in? There's also a sense in which it raises important missional questions. What does the mission of God look like now in a world that is both physical and virtual? Certainly, as I say, in our circuit, we've sort of said, we've got three outputs of ministry. We're doing the physical gatherings, we're doing the online ministry, and we're also doing the written ministry for those who can't connect with the online or the physical. So written or phone ministry including something like Twilio, which is like a dial-a-sermon series service, the online stuff, and the physical gatherings. Of course, the physical gatherings have had to come to an end for now, but we'll re-engage with them again soon. But how do we inhabit this new way of being church and of mission? I've had some conversations where people sort of say, this virtual stuff's okay, but when can we get back to the real world? And I understand the question, but there's also a part of me that says, hang on a moment. There's a real sense in which that virtual world is also a real world. We'll look at that a little bit more with Bryony in a few moments, because Bryony and Wayne will be talking in the next section. So I should introduce her as my colleague. She works locally near to me here in Balborough and Clown. Is someone I consider a go-to person for me. She comes from a background of sort of communications herself, and now I think finds herself being called upon by the Anglican Church, not just locally, but I think nationally as well, to help them think through some of these important questions that we're looking at today. So Bryony, thank you very much for sharing with us today in our session.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and it's nice to see some faces I recognise as well, because I trained up at Durham at Cranmer Hall, which is where the Wesley Study Centre was. So I've seen Pete's here. I trained alongside Pete, so I've been working with alongside Methodists for a long time. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today.
Good. And then maybe just introduce you quickly to Wayne Grewcock as well. Many of you will know Wayne, who served up in this part of the world as well for a number of years. And Wayne, you're welcome amongst us. Wayne has, of course, had one of the sort of key people around the 12 Basket Ministries and the Worship Cloud, serving the wider church in so many different ways. But now serving down on the south coast, as he keeps reminding me, down there, literally on the beach at Budley, Salterton. So Wayne, you're welcome amongst us today, sir. Welcome back to Yorkshire.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Devon is sunny and the beach is just behind me.
We'll get to you two in a moment. Yeah, Brian, did you want to say something about the book just while you're there?
Well, I am going to be talking about it a bit in my bit, but it's the most ecumenical thing I've been involved with, actually, because I wrote a chapter. Joe Cox-Darling wrote a chapter, who many of you all know. And so did Father Matthew, who's a Roman Catholic priest in Malta. So each of us wrote it actually during lockdown about what we were doing. And what was interesting was, I think Pete wanted the book to be about digital church and about online church. And all three of us that were asked to kind of contribute ended up coming up with stuff that actually wasn't just online. It was a mixture of off and online stuff, which is why we changed the name to hybrid from the word digital, which is really interesting. So we're finding that actually the digital bit is just being woven into the rest of what we do, rather than being a sort of separate thing. So I think that's quite helpful and quite interesting to think of it like that, rather than them being two separate things. And I don't know about you, but I'm finding that everything's kind of blending together now in a way that it didn't before, where you used to sort of see these sort of different areas as separate things, but actually they're all kind of converging now. But yeah, it's, as I say, it's most ecumenical projects, because it was a Methodist, an Anglican and a Roman Catholic. And actually Father Matthew talks about praying the rosary with his communities in a rural part of Malta. So really interesting read, and it's only £3.95, so it's quite cheap.
Thank you, Bryony. And just while we're waiting, Wayne, do you want to say something about the ministry of 12 Baskets and the Worship Cloud particularly?
Yeah. So what is now called the Worship Cloud started off as 12 Baskets in 2006. So that's a repository of over 26,000 digital resources that contributors have put on there to share. And that's just a growing way of sharing original digital content. But then out of that, 3.5 years ago, came the Vine, which is a fully scripted local arrangement service. Again, looking at just how we can sort of support churches who are struggling with providing preachers every week. And then in March, as lockdown was happening, and again, similar story to many, looking at how do I as a presbyter support my congregations, especially those without technical skills or abilities. We launched the Vine at Home, which is a shortened, cut down script. And that then now forms the foundation of the service that I do online as well. So again, it's that sort of blending between using the same content, but in multiple platforms at the same way. I suppose also spending a lot of time with people, reflecting how they're using it and the spirituality that's emerging from being locked out of a physical building, and how some are relishing it, some are growing beyond all of their expectations, and some are grieving for what they've lost, and where we all sit in that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move on then into the next session. Just having now introduced Bryony and Wayne. Bryony, can I just invite you just to share a little bit about your own approaches to hybrid worship and ministry and what you've learned during this period, if I can hand over to you.
So I shall do that because I've got a few slides I can talk to. So I'm just going to share those now. There you go. There's a shameless plug for the book. So we've already mentioned that, so I'll move on to the next slide. How do I do that? There we go. Well, hey, right. So I'm going to just mention some of the things that I cover in my chapter of that book, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing in my parishes as well, about the findings. And actually, the first one really, and I think a lot of us have known this for a long time, but it's become much clearer to more people this year that online church is real church. It is real. I don't actually like the use of the word virtual to describe what we're doing, because it implies that it's not real. And of course, actually, our encounters are real. And I was talking to somebody recently about the fact that the early church was a kind of virtual church, really, because of course St. Paul wrote letters. He wasn't physically there. He communicated in letters. And so actually the early church operated in a similar sort of way that we've had to through the lockdown, which is a really interesting thing to think of. So the first point really is that what we do online is just as real as what we do in the church building. It's just different. I think I've been thinking a lot about the metaphor of being fishers of men and thinking about how we fish for people. And when we're online, of course, we've got a much bigger net. And I think also to sort of stretch the metaphor even further, I've been joking with some of my congregation, saying to them, I've got a dialer sermon system, as Sean mentioned earlier, and I've got my online services. And I joked with them and said, and if you get bored with the sermon, you can just fast forward, or you can switch off if you get bored. And people always laugh and everything. And I say it as a joke. But actually, the fact that you can dip in and out at your own leisure acts as the bait to hook the fish in. I think it's much easier, isn't it, to leave an online church service than it is to walk out of a church building if you feel uncomfortable or whatever. So I think actually, if you think about fishing, when we're in the online environment, we've got a much big, it's like we've got a massive trawler net rather than a little fishing net on the end of a stick. So we've got a much bigger net online. I think the next point to say, and I think some of you might have had similar experiences, is that I think people's discipleship has deepened much more. And one of the most interesting ones for me was that I set up a dialer sermon so people can listen to the sermon. I can feel myself coming back to me. Is somebody not unmuted or something? Somebody unmuted? So I can hear some interference on the line. Anyway, I'll carry on. That's better. It's gone now. Yeah, I noticed that some of my ladies that listen to my sermon over the telephone have told me that they listen to it more than once a week. So they listen to it on a Sunday morning, and then later in the week they'll listen to it again, which is terrifying for a preacher because it makes you realise that you need to make your sermons worth repeating. But how interesting is that? And one of the ladies said to me, "Don't take this wrong, Bryony, but I don't always hear everything that you say on a Sunday morning when we're in church, but I can hear every word over the telephone." It's probably because she sits at the back and doesn't put her hearing aid on, but actually people are really, really engaging in what I'm saying. And I'm getting feedback on sermons online. I've never had that kind of feedback before. And I think people's discipleship is definitely getting deeper because people are being forced to be responsible for their own spiritual development when we were in lockdown, and they had to kind of fend for themselves. And I think that's been a really good thing. I posted out a load of little prayer booklets at the beginning of lockdown of people that didn't have the internet, and some of them said that they did a little prayer every day, and they're people that probably wouldn't have done that before. So I think people's discipleship is deepening, and I think that's quite exciting actually, because I always find discipleship's one of the hardest things to do as a church. Another thing as well is that when we're online, we can be a lot more bold. So I've got this verse here from Ephesians where Paul says, pray for me so that when I speak, a message may be given to me to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel. And you can be a little bit more blatant online, because we're very embarrassed, aren't we, as British people, about talking about our faith and evangelizing and all that sort of thing. But online, it's far less intimidating, actually. And it's also a lot easier for a congregation member to perhaps forward a YouTube video to a friend than it is to physically get that person to come to church with you. So I think we're feeling a lot more confident with our message online than we perhaps would be in a church building. So I've been using this kind of little Venn diagram to sort of think about who it is that we're trying to reach with what we do. And my aim with what I sort of throw my energies into is to try and make sure that I cover all three of these groups. So we've got our offline congregation, and I don't mean that in a kind of negative terminology. It's just a way of labeling people that aren't on the internet, but people that would come physically usually to a church service. So you've got your offline congregation, then there's the online congregation, and some of that will overlap with your offline congregations. Obviously you'll have people that come to your church services who also are online, but then you may have picked up this year a few more in your online congregation that perhaps have never been to a service in your church, but they've perhaps been following your Facebook page for a while for your church and started to watch some of your online services and things like that. So there's the online congregation. And then there's this third group of sort of curious observers who might just see something being shared by a friend and kind of think, oh, I might watch that. So there's those three groups that we're trying to sort of hit with what we do. So you might want to reflect on where you feel your energies are and whether you might need to refocus a little bit to make sure that you're not leaving out a significant group of people. I've been using this as a sort of way of describing some of the different activities that you can do. Please don't feel intimidated about online stuff. I've been quoting Roosevelt a lot this year. He said, comparison is the thief of joy. So don't compare yourself with the church up the road because you'll only make yourself miserable. And even like at the beginning of lockdown, I mean, I'm quite confident with using online stuff, but even I was pretty intimidated by what some people were managing to create and do. But I'm just a vicar on my own. It's me and my laptop and that's it. I haven't got a team of people that can do fancy, flashy things for me. I haven't got a worship band. I haven't got any of those things. So don't compare yourself. And every context is different. So what will work well in one context won't necessarily work in another. So, for example, my friend Chris, he's a vicar in Wensleydale, it is. Yeah, Wensleydale. It's like makes you think of Wallace and Gromit. He's vicar in Wensleydale, and he made a decision at the beginning of lockdown to just do all of his services over the telephone. So he uses free telephone conferencing. And in fact, that's where I found out how to do it, through him. And does all of his services over the phone. He decided not to do any online stuff because of the context that he's in. People have really rubbish internet connections in Wensleydale, and a lot of them are very elderly as well, and just use their landlines to keep in touch with each other. So you choose what's right for your context. But what I've got here on this slide is sort of a simple level of things that you can try. So one would be podcasting, which sounds complicated, but all it is making an audio recording and then making that audio recording available for people to listen. That's all podcasting is. And the easiest way to do it is to download a free app called anchor.fm. Totally free, and you can create a free podcast for your church. It's brilliant. You could use it for sermons. You can use it for all sorts of things. I use it to do a daily prayer service, and people can kind of listen to the prayer service while they're doing the washing up or on the way to work if they're still going to work on the commute. So podcasting is really straightforward and quite an easy thing to do. Already mentioned telephone conferencing. That's very easy to set up. At the end of this presentation, there's a link to my blog where there's loads of articles on how to do all these things, by the way. More moderate level, some of you will have been doing live streaming your services from church. That's what I decided to do when we got back into the church building again for services. We just set up my phone on a tripod basically and recorded the service live. You could also perhaps record sermons as well. And there's some different tools that you can use for doing that. And then the more complex level would be perhaps pre-recording a service. So getting people to send you, what I did during lockdown was I got people to record themselves doing Bible readings, doing the prayers, sending me either videos or audio of them doing that. Simplest way to do that, if you haven't done it yet, is to use WhatsApp, because inside WhatsApp is a free voice recorder, and you can just get people to send you a voice recording. And I had 80-year-olds doing that for me during lockdown, sending me one of the readings for Sunday via WhatsApp. So it's quite easy to do that. And then I gathered all the bits together and then made a video. And that's the complicated bit. And Sean was talking about using iMovie. You have to get your head around how to use that sort of thing. So yeah, if you've got a Mac, you'll have iMovie, which is the free editing software on a Mac. If it's a PC you use, there'll be Windows Movie Maker. If you don't get on with either of those, there is a free bit of software called OpenShot that is quite a good video editing bit of software. There's also a thing called Open Broadcasting software, which I use to broadcast my services. And if you're Anglican like me and like lots of liturgy, you can have the words of the service come up on the screen next to you, which is pretty handy. So there's the sort of 3 different levels. I've mentioned dialer sermons. I'll skip that. I'll skip ahead because I'm running out of time, I think. Another thing you can do is record a service in Zoom and then edit the video afterwards. And I did do that for an Ascension Day service, and that worked quite well. So I had a few people that were going to take part in the service. We sort of basically did the service in Zoom and recorded it, and then I edited it into a video. And then I put them on YouTube. I'll just finish with a quick idea for Christmas that I've had. I'm going to make a pre-recorded 9 lessons and carols service. I'm going to ask people to send in audio or video recordings. I'm going to see if any local children would like to send in pictures to illustrate the carols and the readings. I'm going to put that all into one video. Then I'm going to broadcast the video as a sort of premiere online. But I'm also encouraging people to dial into phone church on Christmas Eve. And I'm literally going to play the video over the phone to the people tuning in. So it's just a quick idea for Christmas. And as I say, you can do all that by visiting my blog, and I've got some detailed instructions on how to do all of those things. I'll stop there because I think I've taken up enough time. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Bryony. Thank you very much for sharing all that useful. And it's good that this has been recorded today so people can go back and pick up maybe again some of the stuff you've said there, and your own blog has got absolutely full of stuff that's really useful to us, and I've certainly depended on it. I want to come to Wayne now, and Wayne's already introduced something of his ministry in terms of the worship cloud, etc. But Wayne, one of the questions I really wanted to talk to you about, and it's one that I've been wrestling with, as you know, in my own circuit. In one sense, the model that I came across in America would indicate that really you just need the one preacher, and that can be dispersed around all the churches on the circuit, versus the local. So the circuit versus the local, and where do you locate your online ministry, and how do you best share around your resources, use your gifts, etc. And I know from talking to you that's something you've been thinking about as well. So can I just invite you to speak into that for a few minutes for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, thank you to Bryony, and I would echo an awful lot of what she says, certainly about the virtual. I think that's a whole lesson we've gone on. So from lockdown, my solution was paper, because of the age profile of many people that would attend worship. And I just took the decision, I'm the minister of 4 buildings, 3 churches, that I would just write one service or pull on the worship cloud and the Vine resources and create one act that we sent to all people. And then from the first Sunday came a request from one of my small churches, couldn't we have a Zoom coffee after we've all read and prayed the service? To straight away going, well, why can't you lead that same service on Zoom the next week? And our but as a section. So there is only one service for all of my centres of worship. And so in our circuit, there are 22 churches, and we currently have, I think, 3 online acts of worship that we encourage members of the circuit who, especially pre-lockdown and even those that couldn't, to sort of engage with the acts of worship we had online. And I think, so a lot of my thought has been going about the parochial nature and attitude of our people. Yeah. And how can we get them to expand their view to actually discover worship that meets their spiritual need, instead of just being going, yes, but I live here, or I've always gone there. So that's part of the discussion we're having as a circuit. Let's not replicate it. Let's just offer a variety, a menu of online worship. And again, for me, that's spun even further, because, and I think everyone that's doing online worship will have people from different parts of the country, or we have a member from Athens every week. So I'm also trying to envisage and start conversations about an online Methodist community. Yeah, so that actually people can belong to that community of worship and prayer and mission, even if they actually don't live anywhere near us, but they just feel sort of called to be part of this. So how can we sort of make an umbrella organisation? So our working title is, because again, if I've not said recently, we live by the sea. And so we're looking at creating something called Shoreline Methodist Community that, yes, has a centre here, but actually encourages people from whoever, if this is your new spiritual home, then hey, come and be part of this community. I think also, which is sort of spreading your question a little bit, Sean, I think there's a fascinating question with online and hybrid. Are we trying to replicate what we did and what we do in buildings, or are we actually trying to innovate and discover new ways? Again, it's been interesting. I've set up what I hope is a sort of an ethos of learning. So after every Sunday, I will ring a random selection of people that have participated either on Facebook or Zoom, which is the way we lead our services, and just ask for feedback. Yeah, what moved them, what didn't they like, what was annoying, what was really uplifting, just so we can all learn and everybody, to encourage everybody to be part of that sort of growing learning of this new way. And it's been fascinating how many people have accidentally created a spiritual space in their home. Never had one before, but they've discovered that a rhythm and a routine has emerged. And so actually now they've gained that. Yeah, that's almost a permanent spiritual space has evolved in this time. So again, for me, that's fascinating as we look, as we move that forward. And again, echoing something Bryony said, because I send around what the Vine at Home, I suppose, every week. How many people are coming to the service having already studied the service? Yeah, having engaged with it, having read around it. I can't stick to a script to save my life, so I'm sort of ad-libbing and adding all sorts, which I say that's the preachy bit. And I've even have members now with a notepad and pen noting down all the ad-libs. Yeah, because they want to reflect on it. So that level of study, that level of discipleship is immense compared to turning up at 10:30, standing up, sitting down and having this service come at them, and then they go home. So again, providing the script, I think is a fascinating innovation as we move forward.
Thanks.
Does that sort of fancy?
Yeah, that's spot on, Wayne. Thank you very much. Folks, you've been listening to us now for a good bit of time. Sorry about the breakdown and the ability to go off and do a group earlier on, but I think we can make that happen now. And as you go into those groups, I mean, just to maybe pick up, try and move away, if you like, from the questions about which software to use or which particular approach, but just the wider question of hybrid approaches and what issues what Bryony has shared and Wayne has raised for us there. Just discuss those in your group. So what issues are raised by Bryony and Wayne, and what are the challenges of hybrid ministry in your experience, and what other responses do their insights cause for you? So welcome back, everybody, and just encourage those who have been the sort of ones hosting the conversations to put as much as you can into the chat so that we can capture that for later on in our conversations. So thank you. I want to move on now. I'm aware our time's going past us very quickly. I want to welcome in James Morley. James is one of our co-superintendents in the Sheffield circuit, and he's someone who, again, is someone I've learnt stuff from along the way in terms of the online ministry. Certainly early on, I was picking his brains quite a bit. And like myself, he's found ways of doing the online ministry in a way that's relevant to himself and his own ministry. One of the things I found in America was how homogenous the churches were, in the sense that they were focusing on one particular group of people. And there was a part of me that ecclesiologically and theologically didn't like that. But at the same time, in terms of the mission that we're engaging in, sometimes it is horses for courses, as they say. So I'm going to invite James to share a little bit about how hybrid ministry has developed for him over this last period, and particularly the metal Compline. So over to you, James.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, just to clarify, that conversation where Sean was picking my brains was a very short conversation. So no, thank you, Sean. So this, so not to make other presbyters or deacons with us jealous, but I had a sabbatical this year, and during that time, wanted to ideally visit Whitby as a spiritual thin place for me, but also a place that I found a lot of people who were into similar sort of rock, metal, goth kind of music and subcultures visiting a lot as well. And I guess partly reflecting what Sean's just said, and that potential for mainstream church to be a little bit homogenous. In one of the books I was reading, people were saying, isn't it a shame that people are drawn to places like Whitby by darkness rather than the wonderful Christian history of such a place, and then reflecting on Psalm 139 and where perhaps darkness and light might be one, with God, and thinking, well, actually, I like this sort of music, and I dress this way that's sort of, has just been called dark. Does that, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for other people like me? Am I the only person who's been asked to leave a church because they had a heavy metal t-shirt on, or whatever? So I think, again, through the gift of sabbatical, reconnecting with who you are, started to explore what it would be like to offer something using, liturgy and the discipline of evening prayer and a repeated liturgy, but written and offered in a style that had the tone that you might find when you read lyrics of Black Sabbath lyrics or whatever it might be. And also then to talk about music and to signpost people to resources that say, actually, do you know what, you can be into this music, this culture, and seek to follow Jesus as well. So that was the initial thing. I think people, might have come initially and casually observed and gone, "Core blimey, that ain't for me." But I know somebody on the edge of my physical church community who this might find this interesting, and so that's kind of how it seems to developed with people who've also found perhaps they either felt or were made to feel that they didn't fit in when they popped along to physical gatherings because of the way they looked or whatever. And again, people's assumptions about, I suppose, particularly some of the more extreme sides of rock and, well, extreme sides of metal. So by offering that every day, it has grown into what feels like an online community, and I think deliberately online, because this, I think, is about connecting a network together. People who are connected through their common interest in a certain sort of music, and to create a space in which faith might be explored. I think the advent of the Methodist way of life coming along has been a real gift, because then that's a real a question we can explore each night, and I think increasingly looking at what do those questions sound like from a sort of metal and rock subculture perspective, and how might our responses inform our discipleship within those subcultures. So it has been connecting and hopefully trying to spotlight things that people might find helpful. So whether it's people doing some in Norway doing mission and outreach and putting on bands and festivals and record labels in Norway, where there was some very period of what was deemed satanic music and church burnings. So some real frontline stuff. Someone who's produced the Metal Bible full of as well as a New Testament, but testimonies from secular rock and metal musicians as something that you can use yourself, but also is just a way in for people, again, as a practical missional tool in terms of living out discipleship daily in a local context, but hopefully that connecting together being a safe place of expressing shared interest, but also accountability and discipleship. And I have to say, when somebody polls in and says, I think the question for Methodist Way of Life was, how are you caring for yourself? And this response comes, I've started going to AA meetings. So, online, public, and so you think, fair play. People are really being willing to be courageous and vulnerable, and their response and care from each other is really quite profound sometimes. And also, I think just at a place, perhaps because it is online, you can point people in the direction of it. They can check it out and decide that actually it's not for them. It's a bit easier to walk out of, isn't it, than sort of standing up and climbing over 3 people to get out of a church pew or something like that. So I think I think, but in terms of, I suppose, for me personally, in terms of the missional sense, perhaps it is about, so for the liturgy, yes, we've got a set of words that we say every night, and the rhythm of that, but also using, lyrics from quite often secular metal bands, not to try and trample over the artistic integrity of the person who wrote those songs, but just to say, actually, as Christians, some people might judge this music, those into it and that associated subculture, as dark, dangerous, demonic even. But actually, when you look at some of these words, some of which, are a critique that perhaps we need to hear as church or Christendom. And so hopefully it becomes a two-way conversation by showing those lyrics as part of liturgy, as a way to either acknowledge something from that day. So I guess it's elements of the examen, if you like. So we might just spend time thinking of things from today, even if it's a small, tiny thing that we just want to be thankful for, something that has lifted our spirits, our soul, put us in touch with who we really are, whatever language we want to use, and also things that we want to let go of or lay down, that perhaps looks and sounds a bit familiar to confession, and again, offering a time of prayer, but saying a version of the Lord's Prayer that perhaps tries to, again, draw upon some of the language and imagery of kind of metal and that sort of culture. I think trying to very much visually, in terms of music, tone, language, visual stuff, very much say this is within this culture. So yeah, Does that answer the question that I've now forgotten you asked me?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful example of a particular, if you like, subculture and how you're engaging with that missionally and encouraging a Methodist way of life within that. And so it's one way in which, if you like, the season of lockdown and has led your own ministry. I mean, this has been something new and quite creative in that sense. I know others have had experiences of creativity in this form of ministry as well. But thank you, James, for sharing that. I wonder if I can move on to Phil Rowland. Phil, I must confess, is someone I've not met until we've been conversing by email, but he was introduced to me by Neil Harland on our district, who said this would be a good voice to hear. And there's a sense in which what I think Phil's going to share resonates with something that I've felt myself for a long time, that it's becoming more and more difficult, even in just normal congregational life on a circuit, to resource well excellence in each of the acts of worship. I mean, I do believe that to love the Lord our God with all our love, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbour as ourselves, is inviting us to not perfection, but to excellence, to do things well. But it's difficult to do things well when we've got limited and ever reducing capacity. And also with the online ministry, this brings up challenges as well. Do we try to do 5 or 6 services on a Sunday across the circuit that are okay, or do we try and do 1 or 2 that are really good? So these are sort of questions I wrestle with, and I know, Phil, you've been thinking these things through from your perspective. So could you introduce yourself very briefly and share with us now? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Sean. Hi, everybody. Yeah. So my name's Phil Rowland. So I am a member of Hatfield House Lane Methodist Church, which resides in the Sheffield district in a region called Shire Green. We're a very sort of small church, as most people thought, about a 40-ish congregation. And if you can picture the scene, and it's hard not to, back in March of last year, or this year rather, I wish it was next year, but March, we took the decision 1 week ahead of lockdown to actually close the church. And as you can imagine, and we all felt this in terms of high emotions around anxiety, stress, unknowns of what was going to happen. And so I actually work in the technology industry. I actually work for Microsoft, and I do a lot of work in terms of transforming organizations. And I saw the skills that I'd got actually come to the fore in terms of from that perspective. And working with the church council, we quickly established a phoning service with regards to our church. And we've been running that ever since and continue to run that, as most of the churches do. But in terms of the sort of doing things well and doing things less, we drawn our experience really of we didn't go for a full hour-long service. We kind of cut that down to half an hour. We worked with preachers that had not done this before, or with our minister, Henry, to make sure that the sermon was very crisp, very focused, and was geared towards people that were on the phone. We took a decision to go phone-in service. Our average congregation is about 65. We could have pulled in probably 10, 15% online through Zoom, but we wouldn't have got the numbers. So we actually maintain the same numbers, if not more now, than we do for a normal service. So we average about 45 to 55 in our congregation that join every Sunday. And we have a few other churches that join in as well. And so we've also managed to keep it very much the same as a normal service, in the sense of there's notices at the beginning, there's Bible readers. In the same way we're interacting as speakers now on this call, we have people that come in on that call. We'll actually do the readings and help out with the preaching and make it engaging. We pull our hymns from music streaming sites such as Spotify, Deezer, even YouTube. So we're able to pull on a number of resources in order to substitute for the organist, as we're doing now in terms of facilitating and keeping everyone on mute. That's a really important thing in terms of doing things well, so people can listen clearly, there's no background noise, etc. And we've kind of continued that. And where we are today is we're now actually going and developing that further into a series of services that will run midweek as well as Sunday during December. And we've got interaction because over that time, people have built that confidence, and it's taken that amount of time. And we've kind of, I think people have mentioned this, is you've got to walk before you can run. So people have now become used to using the technology. It's become sort of muscle memory in terms of phoning in. Some have now even moved online and are using the technologies, but they didn't feel comfortable at first, but they're actually using that now. And so we're now moving into where this is becoming, dare I say, the new normal for us. We've got the Sunday school that operate on a Sunday morning before, all online. They're the easiest group because they're familiar with the technology. So from a church point of view, we've drawn on these experiences. And to what Sean's saying is, when you start to think about it, we've been able to reimagine what worship is, both from a planning perspective. So the person that now sets our services and looks for preachers can draw on the world to bring in preachers from anywhere. It took them a while to realize that because it's online, it's kind of from any place, anywhere in the world, we can draw on preachers. So our scope to do things well and bring in preachers that we maybe wouldn't have been able to draw on before is now an opportunity which we're starting to capitalize on. The other thing that I would say as well is again, that the online music is an interesting one. I think this is an area where I think the online streaming are starting to realize that there is demand for more music in this area and so on. So I would expect a trend in this area. But one of the things that would be useful is to build central resources around our music and so on, to be able to draw on that, to be able to have it whilst we've got these services are online. Because not everyone will know how to use them, but I think that is an area. And one of the benefits of this is we keep people on mute, but they're able to sing, which I think you said right at the beginning, Sean, people can't actually sing in the services at the moment, but online they can and are doing, and you have to be very careful to make sure people on mute, because people will come off and sometimes sing. So that's always interesting challenge to keep that. And generally we're able to interact in the same ways. That has led us in terms of when we start to look forward, not only can we bring in more preachers, but it starts to get you thinking about, I wonder if we're actually focused on the right things. So I'm a treasurer and also a property secretary, and I work with the property as most people do. And it's got me thinking around, we've managed to succeed without necessarily having the building being a focal point for us. And so when we think about MANs, should we be thinking about studios? When we think about having ministers stationed everywhere, do we need ministers stationed everywhere? When we've got the opportunity to draw on these resources in a way that we never have before. And that's why I came with, and this I've stolen this from the NHS, where I do a lot of my work in day-to-day work, is they are reimagining healthcare. And what I mean by that, and we're all going to experience it and touch it at some point, because when you go to a GP now, you have an online consultation before sometimes you go and see it. That is reimagining healthcare, because there aren't enough GPs around. In the same, so we can take those learnings and look at what that means in the ministry. Have we got enough ministers to station everywhere? No. Have we got the technology to put a minister into everyone? Possibly, yes, we have, because they can be in more places all the time. And so you can start to think about reimagining not only your own services, but reimagining what that means within a district, within a circuit, in terms of the resources that you can draw on. And it's not saying you kind of flip. The word hybrid is being used, and I absolutely, and our congregation absolutely long to go back into services and so on. But it has got us thinking, and it has got us as a church now starting to think, where do we go next, particularly depending what your mindset is, whether we're going to come out of this virus in the next month, 2 months, or maybe 6 months. So we're in our mindset, we're thinking that what we're doing now is going to happen for the next 6 months. And we've gone from this state of trying this and being confident with it to now wanting to experiment further with this in terms of what we do. And these interactive services as well, rather than just recording something and pushing something out, getting your congregation, as you would in a normal service, engaged in the service, are the things to start to look at how you evolve the use of the technologies. So doing the Bible readings, doing sketches, we've done all of these things, and we're not afraid to fail. That's one of the key things that we've found within our church, both within our ministers' mindset and the congregation's mindset. We will try things and then review, and if it hasn't worked, we'll go back to the way we were. If it does work, we've got it. We're building it into our kit bag of what we call technical services in terms of how we can move and do things forward. And it would be great to kind of build all this collateral, record some of these services. So there's an online, in a YouTube for church type thing, not just, but in a catalogue where you can search it, where you can search for particular sermons, who's been talking about this, who's been talking about that. We've often probably, I'll leave you with this one thought in terms of, we've all sat in the pulpit and thought, that's been a really good sermon. I wish I could remember. And I think, Bryony, you talked about this, and people are able to now take notes, but to be able to share that with others. What the online and hybrid services are allow us to do as we're recording this service, this discussion now, is to go back and reflect. And so I in this time of sort of darkness, I do genuinely think that there's a lot of positivity that we need to draw from technology and how it can enable us and challenge us to think and operate and reimagine worship in a different way.
Thank you, Phil. That's amazing. Thank you. Neil was absolutely right to point you in this direction and to have you sharing with us today. So thanks to Neil and thanks to Phil. I'm glad this has been recorded today, because I want to go back and listen to a number of things myself that has been said today to help inform my own ministry as we go forward. I wonder if we might just have a very quick 5 minutes in small groups, just to give you an opportunity to maybe capture what is your own takeaway, what's your own thing that you want to go and explore more after today, what's your own learning. So thank you to those who have shared with me this afternoon. So a number of people have mentioned about trying to get a resource bank together of songs and resources. And as mentioned before, the Worship Cloud is a really useful resource for us in all of this, and Wayne's work in that respect. We also have Singing the Faith Plus, which is something we can access. Also Matt Beckenham's materials, who's from our own Doncaster circuit here in the Sheffield district. So, I mean, there's all kinds of resources out there, and certainly the conversation I've been in with Neil and others here, Sam and others, to try and see if we could draw together the best of the materials from roundabouts. But it's an ongoing conversation, and maybe perhaps one beyond today. But I want to hand back now to Carla, and just once again, thanks to everyone for your participation in today. So Carla, back to you.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you for a really great afternoon, and lots of food for thought being given to us. So thank you for curating that for us, Sean. We really appreciate that. Let me add our apologies for the tech issues, but I do hope what you found nuggets of information that you can take away with you and you can apply in your own context. Let me add to Sean's thanks, but first, thank you to you, Sean. Thank you to all the contributors, to Bryony, Wayne, James and Phil. Thank you to the group facilitators and to, I would say tech team, but it's tech individual, to Catherine, who has kept the show on the road against all odds even during the afternoon. And to you as participants. It wouldn't be a very a joyful experience of a webinar if we were here on our own. So thank you for joining us. We will ask the contributors to pass on any links and recommendations and reading lists to us, and we'll collate those together and send them in a post-webinar communication to you. If you want to join us for future webinars, you'd be most welcome. Our next webinar is titled Christmas is Not Cancelled. You'll be pleased to hear that. Christmas is not cancelled, and it'll be on Tuesday, the 17th of November. At this webinar, you'll have opportunity to find out more about the Methodist Church Christmas Campaign, as well as time to share ideas of how we'll be telling the Christmas story outside of our church communities this year. And then in January, there is a further regional webinar on the 27th of January, transformational leadership, introducing 6 core practices essential for seeing transformation in the local church, and that'll be led by Dr. Nigel Pimlott. We hope again you found this afternoon helpful. Let's end in prayer. Let's pray together. Almighty God, we thank you for our time together this day. Give us boldness to engage in the ministry you call us to. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.